Welcome back. This is the time of year, isn't it? Leaves are starting to change around here, and everybody's starting to get out their hunting equipment, deer hunting equipment, because a lot of the archers are already out there bow hunting. But pretty soon the range is going to start filling up with people, especially on Saturdays and Sundays, to sight in their various rifles. But one of the questions that pops up this time of year, most especially, is what's the value of each one of these little stops on this elevator rear sight? In other words, it's a fairly crude rear sight. There are certainly more precise instruments out there, and I could certainly recommend something more precise than this. But this is what a lot of people go afield with. They enjoy hunting with a lightweight rifle that has simple sights, and whether they appreciate the type of sight it is, it really is neither here nor there. It's a very popular combination. So it's fairly easy to figure out what the adjustments are on that rear sight. It's a lot easier than you might think. I've read so many of the different blogs over the years, people giving their various explanations and their opinions, and there isn't too much consistency in the things that people have to say about those click values. You might call them click values. They're just simply steps on this elevator notch. And I'll show you more closely. It's this little gadget right here that's called the elevator. It just simply slides underneath the sight, and there are only four positions on a typical elevator sight. But they do a pretty credible job of getting this type of gun adequately sighted in for the deer hunter, or for the black bear hunter, or for anybody who's going out for hogs or whatever. Keep in mind that this is roughly up to 150-yard rifle. This one here happens to be my .336 Marlin in .35 Remington. It could be my .32 Model 94. It could be a .30-30. It could be anything, but they're all approximately the same ball game when you're talking about range. Realistic range on these is roughly 150 yards, and that includes even these, pointed Hornady lever revolution bullets that are loaded on this ammo. Despite the fact that they have better ballistics, the accuracy of these rifles is not conducive to much more than 150 yards in reasonable terms. Beyond that, I think it's most experienced hunters will generally say that it's a 150-yard proposition, and most of the time the game that's being shot with this is going to be taken at less than 35 yards, especially in the woods. Rare is a shot that is beyond 50 yards, and it's extremely rare is a shot that's up to 100 yards. So this type of sight is more than adequate for that type of shooting. For somebody who has, average vision, and I know that as people get older, including myself, I noticed my eyes deteriorated until the time I had my cataracts fixed, and then I was able to use these sights again, which is a really fantastic thing for me, because I still really enjoy just the quick pointing ability of these open sights. Despite the fact that I may possibly get a Lyman adjustable peep sight for it to really improve the speediness of it. This is an adequately quick and accurate rifle for the type of hunting that I'd be doing with it, which is pretty much the same thing that most Eastern hunters will attest to. So determining the value of that elevator is key, because right now, ammunition right now, I just paid $54.95 for this box of ammo, and I was not being I was not being taken advantage of by the local hardware store. That was the list price that they were marking it as. So they were not gouging. That was, they're running $2.75 a shot for these Remington core locks. And as you can see on the market, that's about par for the course right now. So at $2.75 a shot, and with the scarcity of ammo, you really don't want to be doing what I would have recommended years ago, is simply, fire 3 shots at 50 yards, see where the sights are, and then make a click or two adjustment up or down, and see what it does, and then fire 3 more. The problem is right now is that that represents a 3-shot group represents a lot of money. So you want to be as efficient as possible in understanding and knowing where those groups are going to go with each one of those step adjustments on this elevator. So let me see if I can explain it to you in very, very simple terms. I made some measurements. And I did it with my Winchester Model 94 as well. And that's the one I outlined it here in paper. If you can see right here on this top, I measured the height with a blade caliper, the pointy end of my calipers. I measured the height from the base to the base of the notch. In other words, I took the elevator physically off the rear sight, and I just pinched it between the calipers and measured the same way that sight would drop down onto each of those steps. So measuring those 4 steps, and there's a square notch on this last one here, and it's just there. It's not an adjustment step. So I marked that not applicable. In fact, it was actually a little bit lower than the last stop. The lowest one measured 0.108, 108 thousandths of an inch high. The next one measured 130, and the next one 148, and the last one was 169. Now, the change between the second and the first and second one represented 22 thousandths of an inch, and the next step up represented a change of 18 thousandths of an inch, and finally the fourth step represented a change of 21 thousandths of an inch. Now, understand that that's certainly an imprecise graduation, you might say. There's no consistency there. Most of those elevators are simply stamped. They're stamped metal, and they're not precision ground or anything like that. That's about typical for the industry. The Marlin was fared a little bit more consistently, and was a little bit more precise in terms of the changes from one step to another, but it still represented a fairly coarse change. The average on this Winchester was 20 thousandths of an inch. So we use that as a basic guide for moving it up and down. And that's also consistent with this sort of ammunition. We're not talking about an MOA gun. We're not talking about a gun that has the kind of accuracy where finite degrees of measurement are really going to mean that much. You can say an average of 20 thousandths of an inch, and that's going to be close enough for government work. Now, also, the other thing you need to know is your sight radius. The sight radius on both the Marlin and Model 94 Winchester, the 336 Marlin and 94 Winchester, with 20-inch barrels was a 17-inch sight radius. In other words, from the bead on the front to the blade on the back, it was exactly the same at 17 inches. Now, all you need to know is how many times that 17 inches goes into 100 yards. And it's a fairly quick and easy calculation. I think any 5th or 6th grader can probably do. There's 36 inches per yard, and So how many inches in 100 yards? Add 2 zeros, 3,600. So it's 3,600 inches to 100 yards. The formula for that is pretty simple here. So you divide 3,600 by 17, 3,600 by 17. That's the 3,600 inches downrange divided by your sight radius, and then you multiply that times the average of, right here, the average of 20 thousandths, 0.020. And what you come out with is 0.423. I should say 4.23 inches. That's how much change is affected at 100 yards with one of those step adjustments. So you can say it's roughly a 4 MOA. It's a 4 MOA change, plus or minus, depending, and that factors in also to the varying degrees of consistency within those steps from one to the other. Now the marlin was a little bit coarser, more consistent, but a little bit more coarse. So that one ended up being 5 MOA, give or take. So that's a pretty good way of computing your changes. A 4 MOA change at 50 yards is going to be 2 inches. So if you're sighting in your rifle at 25 yards, for instance, a 1 step change is going to represent a 1 inch change on the paper, and that's a pretty good way of sighting your gun in. A rifle of this sort, if you bench it at 25 yards, and you know that you're aiming at aim at a small dot that you can see, an orange dot that you can see at that range. Just place your bead directly on that dot and fire your shot, and make your adjustments from there. So all you have to do is move it 1 click for every inch that you wish to move it at 25 yards, and that's all you have to do. Your trajectory with and then if you want, you can step it off to 100 yards and see where you're landing. The flatness of a 35 Remington and a 32 Winchester Special and a 30-30 Winchester, actually, they're not too bad with the round nose or flat nose bullets. They're actually not that bad out to 150 yards. There's roughly about an inch. There's 3/4 of an inch to an inch change between the muzzle and 100 yards. If you sight it on at 100 yards, zero, point blank at 0, you're going to be roughly an inch or so high, someplace midpoint downrange. So you're never going to be higher than an inch over your aiming point between 0 to 100 yards. And with the accuracy that these put on, anything, you might as well say you're dead on out to 100 yards with these rifles, which is pretty good. And you'll have a loss of about 3 inches at 150 yards. Well, you'll say, well, gee, I can get, you can look at any ballistic shot, and it looks like you can get way out to 200 yards without much difficulty, and you're ballistically, on target. Well, you are on paper, but with these sights, with these coarse beads and the coarse blade on the rear, and given the modest accuracy at best of these guns, they can be as good as 3 MOA. Some people can claim a little bit more. I wouldn't be so generous to say that that's typical. That would be a very atypical situation. You have a barrel band that's snug around the front of that magazine tube in the barrel, and then you've got one at the fore end, the wood fore end. It's not a free float situation, and not only that, but the vibrations change from shot to shot as the number of rounds in that magazine is depleted. So what you can do by sitting at the bench and feeding them in one at a time, sitting there with, with a rest, and what you can do in actual field situations are two different things entirely. But you can also use that same method of computing your windage, and it's a hammering over affair. In order to move these sites, it's everything about taking out a quality. I use a piece of German silver. You can also use a nylon. You can also use a nylon rod or a brass rod or anything like that. But you don't want to use steel on it because you're going to mar that surface. But gently, place the rifle on a firm but padded surface, and drive that sight over just a wee bit. What I like to do is I like to take a piece of tape and put it across here, masking tape, and right where the point of that front sight is, place a pencil line, and a pencil line. The width of a thin pencil line is roughly about 16 thousandths of an inch. And an eighth of an inch, I should say, 8 thousandths of an inch with this gun will give you a fraction of that 20 thousandths of an inch that I talked about. So you can use that as a basis for knowing how far you've moved this. You don't want to move these too far. You make your adjustments very, very gradually, because again, that 20 thousandths moves it 4 inches on paper. So you don't want to be smacking it over 20 thousandths unless you really have to move it. Most of these guns have been pretty well calibrated at the factory, because their machinery presses these sights into place, and they're usually pretty consistent about how they do that. And just like with government rifles, the fact that the sight is pointed down that barrel means that it's going to go pretty much in the same direction. So it's a fairly routine game to get these sighted pretty well. And if you have to move it more than just a little bit, if it's going to disfigure the appearance at the rear, remember you can split the difference up here too. You can check your front sight and see if the front sight might be off kilter. It might be shoved in a little bit too far one way or the other. So you can split the difference, or you can sometimes make up the entire difference if this sight is right dead center and you don't want to change the appearance of the gun. Sometimes you can drift this one over a little bit more without making it noticeable. Or as I say, you can move this one in one direction half the distance and move this one the other half. And always remember that your rear sight is always moved in the direction that you wish your shots to move, whether it's up and down or left and right. And your front sight is moved in the opposite direction. So you always make your changes in the opposite direction with your front sight. That also applies to elevation changes too, because you can get sights that drift into these ramps, or sometimes rated directly into the barrel. You can get different heights sights from places like Marble, and I don't know whether Lyman still makes front sights. Williams, I think, still makes them, but you can get them in different height elevations. So that's important to know. If you can't get high enough on your rear sight, you drop your front sight. So by whatever amount that you need to gain, if you need to gain another 20 thousandths of an inch and you just can't get there, take the 20 thousandths off the front. Just simply order a sight which is 20 thousandths of an inch lower. So that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and God bless.